My wife abandoned me with 2 kids for a millionaire. Years later, she came back demanding to get her family back. But I had married someone better, and she was left speechless when police arrested her in front of my clients. I'm 36 years old, work in corporate sales, and I need to tell this story because what happened basically destroyed me for years before I could rebuild something resembling a normal life. I guess I should start at the beginning, or not exactly the very beginning, but when things started getting weird with Amanda, my ex-wife. We'd been married for like 10 years. At that point, we had 2 kids, Ethan, who was 12, and Chloe, who was 8. And I thought everything was fine, like normal, with the typical problems of any marriage, but nothing major. But then Amanda started hanging out with this group of women from the gym, all married to guys who made way more money than me. And that's when everything changed. At first, I didn't realize how serious it was. It was just small purchases, a purse here, some shoes there. But then it became completely insane. She'd come home with bags from stores I didn't even know existed, like places where a handbag costs the same as a down payment on a car. And when I asked where the money was coming from, she'd say they were on sale or that she'd used coupons, which was obviously a lie because nobody has coupons for Gucci. I checked the credit cards and basically had a heart attack. We had like $30,000 in debt that I didn't know existed. And when I confronted her, she got super defensive, saying that she also had the right to have nice things, that her friends didn't have to worry about money, so why should she? All that stuff. I tried to explain to her that we didn't make the same money as her friends' husbands, that I was doing the best I could, but that we couldn't live beyond our means. And she just looked at me like I was the problem, like I was a failure for not being able to give her the lifestyle she wanted. Things got more and more tense at home. She spent more time with her friends than with us. She'd come home late. Sometimes she wouldn't even come home to sleep and would say she'd stayed at one of their houses after a dinner or whatever. The kids started noticing. Obviously, Chloe would ask me why Mom didn't have dinner with us anymore, and I didn't know what to tell her because honestly, I didn't understand what was happening either. I thought maybe she was having some kind of midlife crisis or something, even though she was still young. She was like 34 at that point, but people go into weird crises at any age. I never thought, not in a million years, that what was about to happen was actually going to happen. It was a Tuesday. I remember perfectly because it was the day I always left work early to pick up the kids from their activities. I got home around 4 in the afternoon and the house was weird, like too quiet, and I saw that Amanda's car wasn't there, but that wasn't so strange because she went out a lot. I went inside, and the first thing I saw was a white envelope on the kitchen table with my name written on it. I swear in that moment I felt like my whole body froze, because when you see something like that, it's not going to be anything good. I opened the envelope, and it was a letter, handwritten in her perfect handwriting, and it basically said she was leaving, that she'd met someone who could give her the life she deserved, that she was sorry, but she couldn't keep living like this. And here comes the part that still makes me angry to this day. It said she'd come back in a few years when things were calmer, and that she hoped I'd understand. As if it were something completely normal and reasonable, as if she were going on vacation and not abandoning her husband and 2 children. The letter ended with something like, "Take good care of Ethan and Chloe. I know you'll be a good father. Kisses, Amanda." Kisses, Amanda. Can you believe it? I stood there in the kitchen with that letter in my hand, for I don't know how long. I think I was in shock or something because I couldn't process what I was reading. Then I realized I had to go pick up the kids, and I had to shove all that shit inside and act like everything was normal. I picked up Ethan from his soccer practice and then Chloe from her art class, and the whole way home they were talking, and I just nodded without really hearing anything because my brain was completely overloaded. When we got home, Chloe asked where Mom was, and I told her she'd gone out, that she'd be back later. But of course she didn't come back. That night I put them to bed and waited until they were asleep to really let myself feel what I was feeling, and honestly I didn't cry or anything dramatic like that. I just sat on the couch and stared at the wall for hours thinking, what the hell am I going to do now? The first few months were absolute hell. I'm not going to lie. I had to work full-time, cook, clean, take the kids everywhere, help them with homework, everything we normally did between 2 people I was now doing alone. And on top of that, I had to deal with the emotional trauma of explaining to 2 kids why their mother had left, because eventually I couldn't keep saying she was traveling or visiting someone. Ethan was older, and I think he understood faster what had happened. He got very quiet and withdrawn for a while, and Chloe was younger, so she didn't fully understand. But she cried a lot, asking when Mom was coming back. I myself didn't know what to tell them because the letter said she'd come back in a few years, but I had no idea if that was true or just something she wrote to feel less guilty. I had to get a second job on weekends because it turned out Amanda had taken a good chunk of our savings, plus all the debt she'd accumulated, so financially we were in a horrible situation. I sold my car and bought a cheaper one. We canceled all subscriptions and memberships, basically cut every expense that wasn't absolutely necessary. The house felt too big and empty without her, and every time I walked past a room, I'd remember something. Like that's where we celebrated Chloe's birthday, that's where Ethan took his first steps, all that shit that breaks your heart when your life is falling apart. After like 6 months, I decided we needed a complete change. Start fresh somewhere where there weren't so many memories. I hired a lawyer and started divorce proceedings. Amanda had left an email address in the letter, so my lawyer was able to contact her about the papers. She signed them without any problems, without asking for anything. No custody or child support or anything. She basically just wanted to be left alone to live her new life. The divorce was finalized in less than a year. Because there was nothing to fight over, she gave up all her rights as a mother, and that was it. We sold the house. Well, I sold it because legally it wasn't hers anymore. And with that money, I paid off all the debts she'd left and had a little left over for the down payment on a smaller house in a town like 2 hours from where we lived before. The town was quieter, cheaper, with better public schools, so I didn't have to pay the private fees we were paying before, and honestly, the change was good for all of us. Ethan started coming out of his shell more, made new friends at school, joined the soccer team again, and Chloe seemed to adapt well too. She had a super sweet teacher who helped her a lot. I got a better job in sales with a local company that let me work from home some days, so I could be more present for the kids. Things started improving little by little. Like it wasn't perfect, and there were still hard days where the kids missed their mother or where I felt completely overwhelmed. But overall, we were building something new, and that felt good. About a year after we moved, I started socializing a bit more. Nothing serious, just occasionally going out with coworkers or with parents of my kids' friends. And one day I went to this bookstore downtown because Chloe needed a book for school, and that's where I met Grace. She worked there. She was like 32 years old, super calm and kind, and we started talking because she recommended some books for Ethan that she thought he'd like. It wasn't love at first sight or anything cheesy like that, but there was something about her that made me feel comfortable. Like when you meet someone and you just connect without forcing it. I started going to the bookstore more often, sometimes with legitimate excuses and sometimes just to see her and chat for a while, and eventually I asked for her number and we went out for coffee. Grace knew about my situation from the beginning. I told her everything about Amanda and the kids, and she was super understanding, didn't judge me or anything, just listened and supported me. We dated for like a year before I decided to officially introduce her to Ethan and Chloe. I wanted to make sure it was something serious before getting them emotionally involved. The kids loved her from the start. She was good with them, without trying to replace their mother. She was just herself. Played video games with Ethan, helped Chloe with her art projects, cooked with them on weekends. After 2 years together, I asked her to marry me. She said yes. And we got married in a small ceremony in the backyard of the house with just close family and friends. Ethan and Chloe were part of the ceremony, like it was important to me that they knew this was something we were doing together as a family. By that point, almost 4 years had passed since Amanda left. The kids didn't talk about her almost at all anymore. When they asked something about their mom, I told them the truth in an age-appropriate way, but in general they had processed the abandonment and had moved on with their lives. Life with Grace was stable and quiet. She had a job she liked. I was progressing in my career. The kids were doing well in school. We had a routine that worked. It wasn't perfect, obviously. No life is. But it was good, it was real, and we felt like a real family. 2 years after we got married, so like 6 years after Amanda left, I got a call from an unknown number on a Saturday morning. I answered thinking it was something work-related or a spam call, and it was Amanda. I didn't recognize her at first because I wasn't expecting to hear her voice ever again. But when she said, "Hello, Ryan, it's me," I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My first instinct was to hang up, but I didn't. I stayed there listening while she talked like nothing had happened, like it had been a week and not 6 years, asking how the kids were and all that. Then she tells me, very casually, that she tried to go to the house, to our old house where we lived before, and there were strange people living there, and she wanted to know what was going on. I told her that obviously there were strange people living there because I'd sold that house like 5 years ago, and she went quiet for a moment, and then said, "But that was our house. How could you sell it without consulting me?" The audacity of this woman. Seriously, after abandoning us without looking back, she was complaining to me about selling a house that wasn't hers anymore. I explained, very calmly, because Grace was nearby and I didn't want to scare her, that we'd gotten divorced years ago, that she'd signed all the papers giving up everything, and that I'd moved on with my life. She went crazy, started yelling, saying that I'd promised I'd wait, that the letter said she'd come back in a few years and that I should have waited. I told her I didn't promise her anything, that her letter wasn't a contract, and that 6 years was quite a bit more than a few years anyway. Then came the question I knew would come eventually. She asked about the kids, said she wanted to see them, that she wanted to make up for lost time. I told her that wasn't up to me, that Ethan was now 18 years old and Chloe 14, that they could decide for themselves whether or not they wanted to have contact with her. She got even angrier, started saying that I'd turned them against her, that I was a manipulator, all kinds of crazy accusations. So I dropped the bomb on her. I told her that I was also married again, that I'd remarried 2 years ago, and she completely lost her mind. She started screaming that I was a cheater. How dare I rebuild my life when she'd said she'd come back, that I'd ruined everything for her. The irony was so ridiculous I almost laughed, but I just told her that she was the one who left, that she was the one who abandoned us, and that I had every right to move on. She asked for my address, said she needed to come talk to me in person, but obviously I didn't give it to her. I told her that if she wanted to try to contact the kids, she could write them letters and I'd give them to them, but that I wasn't going to give her our address or any information about where we lived. I hung up the phone and stood there, shaking with rage. Grace came over and hugged me, and I told her about the whole conversation. That night, I talked to Ethan and Chloe. I told them their mother had called, and that she wanted to have contact with them. Ethan's reaction was immediate and clear. He said no, that she chose to leave and that he had nothing to say to her. Chloe got a little emotional, but also said she didn't want to see her, that Grace was her mom now, not Amanda. Obviously, I explained that Grace wasn't trying to replace their biological mother, and that it was valid to have complicated feelings about all this, but they were firm in their decision. I wrote a text message to Amanda, because obviously I now had her number, and told her the kids didn't want to have contact with her at the moment, that maybe in the future they'd change their minds, but for now, she needed to respect their decision. She responded with like 20 messages in a row, basically saying I'd manipulated them, that they were too young to make those decisions. Ethan was literally an adult, but okay, and that she was going to fight for her rights as a mother. I reminded her that she had legally and voluntarily given up all her parental rights during the divorce, that she had no legal basis to sue for custody or visitation, but she insisted she was going to find a way. The following months were a nightmare of constant harassment, calls at all hours, text messages, emails. She even created fake social media profiles to try to contact the kids directly. I had to block like 50 different numbers because every time I blocked one, she'd get another one. Grace also started receiving messages from her, super aggressive messages, calling her a homewrecker and telling her to stay away from her family, when literally Amanda had been the one who broke up the home by leaving. Amanda also started calling my work, leaving weird messages with my assistant saying it was a family emergency and that she needed to talk to me urgently. And when I didn't respond, she'd call again and again until I had to talk to my toppity says, boss, and explain the situation. My boss was super understanding. Fortunately, he told me to block the number in the office system and that if she kept calling, they'd take legal action. But Amanda didn't stop. She started showing up in random places around town, like I'd see her at the supermarket or at the gas station. And at first I thought it was a coincidence, but it happened too many times to be one. Obviously, she'd found out somehow where we lived and was basically stalking us. She never approached directly or anything because she knew that would be crossing a line, but being there, seeing her, knowing she was watching, was super disturbing. I talked to a lawyer about getting a restraining order, and he told me I needed to document everything. Save all the messages, the calls, any evidence of harassment. I started doing exactly that. I took screenshots of everything, saved the voicemails, noted down every time I saw her in public places with date and time. After gathering enough evidence, like 3 months of documented harassment, I filed for a restraining order. The hearing was super uncomfortable. Amanda was there with a lawyer who honestly looked like he didn't want to be there because the case was obviously weak on her side. She tried to argue that she just wanted to reconnect with her children and that I was blocking her unfairly. But the judge didn't buy it, especially after seeing all the aggressive and threatening messages she'd sent. The judge granted the temporary restraining order and told her she needed to stay away from me, from Grace, and from our children, that she couldn't contact us by any means, and that if she violated the order, there would be legal consequences. I thought that would be the end, that she'd finally understand she couldn't force her way back into our lives, but obviously I was wrong. About 2 weeks after the restraining order, I had an important work dinner with my boss and some potential clients at a fancy restaurant. Downtown. Grace stayed home with the kids. It was a normal Tuesday, and I was there at the restaurant talking business, when suddenly, I see Amanda walking into the place. At first I thought maybe it was a coincidence again, like the town wasn't that big and she could be there for other reasons. But then I saw her walking directly toward our table, and I knew she'd planned this. She got to the table, all smiles and acting completely normal, and told my boss, "Oh, you must be Ryan's boss. I've heard so much about you." And my boss was obviously confused because he had no idea who she was. Before I could say anything, Amanda sat down at the table, literally sat there uninvited, and started talking, saying she was Ryan's wife and that she was so excited to finally meet the people he worked with. I was in complete shock. I couldn't believe she was doing this, and I told her very firmly, "Amanda, you need to leave now. There's a restraining order. You can't be here." She completely ignored me and kept talking to my boss and the clients, saying things like, "Ryan probably hasn't told you about me. He's so private about his personal life," and I knew she was about to cause a huge scene. I told her again to leave or I was going to call the police, and she finally dropped the mask and started screaming that I'd stolen her life, that I'd taken her children away, that I'd married another woman while she still loved me. All kinds of crazy, dramatic things. The whole restaurant was staring at us. My boss and the clients were completely uncomfortable, and I already had my phone in my hand calling 911. The restaurant manager came over and asked Amanda to leave, but she refused. She stayed there screaming until the police arrived like 5 minutes later. The officers took her out of the restaurant. I showed them the restraining order and explained the situation, and they arrested her for violating the order. It was completely humiliating and horrible. I had to apologize 1,000 times to my boss, and the clients briefly explained the situation with my ex-wife, and obviously the business dinner was completely ruined. I thought I was going to lose my job over it, but my boss was incredibly understanding. He told me it clearly wasn't my fault and that he hoped the situation would be resolved soon. Amanda spent a night in jail and had to pay a fine for violating the restraining order, and the judge extended the order for 2 more years and warned her that if she violated it again, the consequences would be much more severe. After that, everything finally calmed down. I didn't hear anything more from her for months. No more calls, no more messages, no more random appearances, nothing. I could breathe again, go back to living without constantly looking over my shoulder waiting for her to show up. Grace and I could focus on our life together, on being parents to Ethan and Chloe, on just existing without all that constant drama. Ethan graduated from high school that year and was accepted to a state university with an athletic scholarship. Chloe was thriving in school and in her extracurricular activities. Everything was finally in a good place. About 3 months ago, so almost a year after the restaurant incident, I got an email from Amanda. It was short and surprisingly mature. Basically said she was in therapy, that she'd been working on herself, that she understood she'd done horrible things and didn't expect forgiveness but wanted me to know she was sorry. I didn't respond to the email because honestly I had nothing to say to her, and because part of me suspected it might be another manipulation, but I mentioned it to my therapist. Yeah, I was in therapy too. All this was super traumatic, and she told me it was good that Amanda was seeking help, but that I had no obligation to respond or allow her back into my life. I didn't tell the kids because I didn't see the point. They'd moved on and didn't need me to remind them of all that drama again. The truth is that now, looking back on all this, I still have a hard time believing it happened. Like, when you're in the middle of it all, it's like it's your new normal, and you don't even realize how crazy it is. But now that I have distance, I can see how absolutely insane it all was. Amanda didn't just abandon us, which is already horrible in itself, but then she tried to force her way back into our lives as if she had the right to do so, as if you could just press pause on people's lives and then come back when it was convenient for you and expect everything to still be the same. The kids are okay now. Better than okay, actually. Ethan is in his second year of college studying engineering and has a girlfriend. Chloe is a normal teenager with her normal teenager drama. And Grace is genuinely the best partner I could have asked for. She was there through all that craziness without complaining, supporting me, being an incredible mother figure to the kids. And she never tried to force anything or compete with Amanda's ghost. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Amanda had never left. If we'd found a way to work through our problems. If we'd gone to couples therapy or whatever. But the truth is, we probably would have been miserable. She clearly wasn't happy with the life we had, and I wasn't going to be able to fundamentally change who I was to meet her unrealistic expectations. The kids would have grown up in a tense and dysfunctional home instead of the stable and loving environment they have now with Grace. I'm not saying I'm grateful that Amanda left us. It was horrible and traumatic and hurt us a lot. But what I built afterwards, the life we have now, that is something I'm genuinely grateful for. I learned that you can survive things you thought would destroy you, that kids are more resilient than you think, and that real love isn't the dramatic movie kind of love but the kind of quiet, steady love that holds you up on the bad days. Last week, Chloe asked me if I ever regretted marrying her biological mother, and I had to think about that for a moment before answering. I told her I didn't regret it because without that marriage I wouldn't have her or Ethan, and that alone made it worthwhile. But that I did regret not seeing the warning signs earlier, not being firmer with boundaries when Amanda started spending out of control and pulling away from the family. I told her that relationships require both people to be committed to making them work, and that when one person decides to leave, there's nothing the other person can do to prevent it. She nodded and then hugged me and told me she loved me, and that she was glad we had Grace now, and honestly, that was all I needed to hear. So, yeah, that's my story. 6 years of drama compressed into this long explanation. And I guess the point is that life goes on even when you feel like it can't. And that sometimes the things that seem like the end of the world end up being the push you needed to build something better.